The clink of silverware was the first sound that broke through the silence after she said it. "You'll cover this, Eleanor." My mother's voice was soft, but carried that unmistakable weight of expectation I'd lived under all my life. For 65 years I'd played the role everyone expected: obedient daughter, reliable mother, polite provider. But in that moment, staring down at the crisp bank notice inside the velvet box, something inside me shifted. My name is Eleanor Calloway, retired accountant, lover of order and quiet mornings. I built my life on control, on structure, on making sure every equation balanced. Yet here I was sitting at a Thanksgiving table that looked more like a courtroom, realizing every sacrifice I'd made for this family had become invisible ink on a page no one bothered to read. The house smelled of roasted turkey, rosemary, and pie scents that should have brought comfort. Instead, they pressed against me, too heavy, too familiar. My daughter Laya sat across the table, smiling like a woman who knew the verdict before the trial began. Her eyes glimmered not with guilt, but confidence. She had orchestrated this moment. The debt wasn't mine, but she knew exactly how to play the roles of gratitude and manipulation, how to wrap guilt in politeness and call it family duty. I should have seen it coming. The invitation had arrived a week earlier, a perfectly handwritten card that said my presence was requested. I'd stared at it for an hour, torn between instinct and hope. Hope that this time would be different. Hope that maybe after all these years I'd be invited not as the financial safety net but as a mother, a person, a part of the family. Foolish, perhaps. But hope has a way of wearing disguises, especially for those of us who have spent a lifetime giving without asking. That morning I had prepared carefully. A loaf of homemade bread wrapped in linen, a bottle of red wine, a scarf for Laya, soft as a whisper, tokens of care meant to bridge distance. As I stepped through her door, the same door I'd once painted myself when she first bought the house, the warmth of the place struck me like a memory and a warning. My parents sat at the far end of the table, smiling their well-practiced smiles, their approval as conditional as ever. Laya's husband hovered nearby, polite but detached, a man who watched the game without ever playing it. The evening unfolded with all the right notes: polite laughter, small talk, the illusion of affection, but beneath it hummed a current I couldn't ignore. Questions about my investments veiled, compliments about my prudence, remarks about how fortunate I'd been in retirement. Each sentence a brick in the wall of expectation. I'd built my stability with years of double shifts, penny pinching, and sleepless nights, but they didn't see that. They saw a resource to be tapped, not a woman who had earned her peace. When my mother slid that velvet box across the table, I already knew it wouldn't hold jewelry. I opened it anyway. The folded paper inside was thin, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. $250,000. A debt I didn't make. A responsibility they assumed I'd shoulder without hesitation. My mother's gaze was steady. My father's silence was approval disguised as restraint. Laya's smile tightened, waiting for the inevitable. I felt my pulse steady. The years of polite compliance, of nodding through judgment, of paying for harmony, all led here. I set the paper down gently and said, "I can't cover this." The words came out calm, level, but they felt revolutionary. Laya blinked as if she hadn't heard correctly. "You'll do it," she said finally, her voice losing its sugar. Then came the sound glass tipping liquid, arching through the air, splashing red against my blouse. Gasps, murmurs the clatter of a fork hitting a plate. I sat still, the sting of wine against my skin, nothing compared to the humiliation burning in my chest. Around the table, no one spoke. My father adjusted his glasses. My mother sighed disappointment dripping from every breath. Families handled things, she murmured. But I wasn't a family solution anymore. Not tonight. I wiped the stain with the corner of a napkin and lifted my chin. The performance around the table continued, but something inside me had gone silent, focused. I saw Laya clearly now, not as the daughter I'd sacrificed for, but as the woman who had mistaken my love for weakness. I looked at my parents and saw not guidance, but conditioning. I looked at the house and saw a lifetime of invisible labor repackaged as obligation. The air was thick with expectation, but I had already made my choice. Across the room, Thomas, my husband, my quiet anchor, stood near the corner, his gaze steady, his presence grounding. For decades, he'd watched me bend without breaking. Tonight, his eyes told me he knew this was the moment I'd stop bending. I took a breath, slow and deliberate, and let the silence stretch long enough for everyone to feel it. This was no longer about money. It was about freedom. Type, continue to receive the next part. The silence that followed my refusal stretched across the table like a drawn curtain. The hum of conversation in other rooms seemed distant, like echoes from another life. Laya's jaw tightened. My mother's sigh came sharp, controlled her way of reclaiming authority. Eleanor, it's family. You've always done what's necessary, she said softly, her tone deceptively calm. But I had heard that voice before. It was the same one she used when I was 12 and forgot to refill her coffee cup when I was 20, and dared to choose accounting over marriage when I was 40, and refused to co-sign a loan for my brother. Guilt had always been her language and compliance her reward. I folded the napkin neatly beside my plate. Not anymore, I said, my voice quiet but firm. The effect was instant. Laya scoffed, pushing back her chair. You'd really let this family fall apart over money? Her words dripped with incredulity, but her tone was less wounded daughter and more wounded investor. She wasn't grieving betrayal, she was losing access. My father's hand trembled against his cane, the quiet thump punctuating the tension. We raised you to take care of what's yours, he muttered. I did, I replied, my calmness unsettling even myself. But that doesn't mean I'll take care of what's not mine. The sting of red wine had dried against my blouse, leaving a faint pink shadow, a reminder of humiliation that would have broken me once. But something inside had hardened, not bitterness, not anger, but clarity. I had spent years defining love as sacrifice, confusing loyalty with silence. Tonight that definition collapsed. Thomas moved then, his voice steady but cutting through the thick air. Enough. Everyone turned toward him. He rarely spoke in family matters, preferring peace over confrontation, but his eyes carried the calm certainty of a man who had seen through years of manipulation. Eleanor isn't responsible for any of this, he said. You've all known how that debt came to be. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. Laya froze the confidence in her expression, faltering for the first time. Thomas, my mother began, but he raised a hand. No, we're not pretending anymore. His tone wasn't angry, just final. Paris, the car, the casino trips, all under Laya's name. You've hidden the truth behind her success story long enough. You thought you could guilt Eleanor into paying the bill. The words hit like glass, shattering in slow motion. My mother's lips parted ready with excuses. My father's eyes flicked toward Laya, demanding denial that never came. Her husband shifted uncomfortably beside her, his silence speaking louder than any defense. The thin mask of civility that had coated the evening cracked, revealing the rot beneath. Laya's voice trembled with feigned indignation. "You have no right to—" "I have every right," Thomas interrupted softly. "Because I watched my wife work herself raw for people who only remembered her when they needed saving. You've mistaken her kindness for currency. That ends tonight." The quiet that followed was absolute. Even the faint jazz playing in the background seemed to pause. My mother's fork clattered against her plate, the final note in a symphony of denial. For years I had imagined speaking the truth to draw a boundary so firm it would echo through generations, but I had never found the courage. And yet here it was spoken for me by the man who had quietly believed in my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. Laya looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're really not going to help me." I met her eyes. Help doesn't mean surrendering everything you have to fix someone else's mistakes. I've done enough of that for one lifetime. Her expression hardened anger, replacing vulnerability. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the polished floor. "I regret only that it took me this long to see what family shouldn't cost," I said. Then I turned, walking toward the door, my steps steady, deliberate. Behind me, the sounds of murmurs rose again, the clatter of utensils, the low, fractured hum of conversation struggling to reassemble itself after the truth had torn through. As I reached for my coat, I felt Thomas's hand slip gently into mine. It wasn't a gesture of rescue. It was solidarity. The kind that says, "You're not alone in this anymore." Outside, the November air was cold and sharp, smelling faintly of pine and rain. I drew in a deep breath, letting it clear the remnants of red wine and tension from my lungs. The porch light flickered behind me, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back. I thought of all the years I'd spent defining myself through usefulness, mistaking acceptance for love. Tonight I had walked away not from family, but from a version of myself that believed endurance was the same as worth. As Thomas opened the car door, he looked at me with quiet pride. "You did it," he said softly. I smiled faintly, eyes on the distant horizon. "No," I whispered. "We did." The house behind us glowed faintly in the darkness, its warmth deceptive, its walls holding generations of unspoken rules. But as we drove away, I felt something unshackle inside me, years of compliance dissolving into quiet freedom. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time it would be mine to decide. The drive home was silent except for the steady hum of tires on wet asphalt. Streetlights cast long ribbons of gold across the windshield, flickering over Thomas's hands on the steering wheel. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, calm, but sharper somehow. For the first time, I wasn't replaying what I should have said or done. I didn't feel guilt gnawing at the edges of my chest, just quiet certainty. When we reached our apartment in Boise, the air inside was still untouched. My coat slid from my shoulders onto the back of the chair. I could still smell the faint trace of red wine in the fabric, the mark of a humiliation turned lesson. Thomas hung up his jacket beside mine and met my gaze with the kind of understanding that didn't need words. I sank into the armchair by the window, the one that faced the city lights. For a moment I simply breathed. The night outside shimmered with the faint hum of winter, the glow of passing headlights painting fleeting patterns on the walls. Thomas brought me a cup of tea, the steam curling upward like a ribbon. "You were remarkable," he said quietly. I smiled the compliment, both comforting and foreign. "I wasn't brave," I murmured. "Just tired of being quiet." He chuckled softly. "Sometimes that's all bravery is, deciding silence has lasted long enough." I looked down at the tea, its warmth seeping into my palms. For decades I had measured my value by what I could give. When Laya was born, I poured myself into motherhood, certain that love was best proven through sacrifice. I'd worked overtime, skipped vacations, denied myself rest, all to make her life easier. I thought if I gave enough, she would see me, appreciate me. But love given without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the curtains. I moved through the apartment, deliberately grounding myself in the quiet. Every object I touched felt more solid than it had in years: the coffee mug, the ledger I kept for small expenses, the neat stack of letters on the desk. They were mine, uncomplicated and honest. After breakfast, I opened my laptop and began reviewing my finances. Not to reassure anyone but myself. I adjusted account permissions, updated passwords, and made small notes about the charities I'd long wanted to support. I'd always postponed those donations, saving in case my family needed me. But what if my purpose wasn't to always be their safety net? What if it was to finally build something that reflected who I was not, what they expected me to be? Thomas watched from the doorway. "Starting a new project?" he asked. "Starting a new rule," I said, half smiling. "If I'm going to give, it'll be because I choose to, not because I'm guilted into it." He nodded approvingly. "Then maybe it's time to plan something just for you." The idea lingered. That evening, I opened a blank notebook and began sketching ideas for a small scholarship fund, one that would help women returning to school later in life. The thought of it filled me with a sense of quiet purpose, a legacy that came not from obligation, but intention. I didn't tell anyone, not even Laya. Some things didn't need permission to exist. Days passed before I heard from her. The call came on a Friday afternoon. I stared at the screen, her name glowing against the light. My thumb hovered, then finally I answered. Her voice trembled with a mixture of anger and defensiveness. "Mom, you embarrassed me, in front of everyone." I let the words settle, then replied gently, "No, Laya." I told the truth. There was a long silence. Then came the quieter voice, younger somehow. "I didn't think you'd actually stand up to them." "That's the problem," I said softly. "You never thought I could." She didn't respond. I could hear her breathing, uneven the way it used to be when she was little and caught lying about something small. "I made mistakes," she said finally. "But you could have helped." "I've been helping for 30 years, I said, my tone calm but steady. "This time you have to help yourself." The silence stretched again. This one didn't hurt. It just existed, necessary cleansing. "I'll figure it out," she muttered almost to herself. "I know you will," I said quietly. "That's what growing up is, even for adults." When the call ended, I felt something loosen inside me. Not relief, not sadness, just space. Space for air, for peace, for something new. That weekend, Thomas and I took a drive into the hills outside Boise. The trees had shed most of their leaves, their bare branches tracing elegant patterns against the pale sky. We stopped by a small cafe, one we'd visited years ago but had forgotten in the busyness of life. The smell of fresh bread and cinnamon filled the air, and for once I didn't think of family gatherings or expectations. Just the taste of coffee, the sound of laughter from another table, the warmth of sunlight through glass. As we drove back home, Thomas glanced at me and said, "You seem lighter." I think I finally understand something I said, smiling faintly. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to live in the same pattern that hurt you. The road curved gently ahead, sunlight glinting off the hood. I leaned my head against the window, watching the horizon open wide. My life wasn't perfect. My family wasn't healed. But I had reclaimed my boundaries, my dignity, my voice. And in doing so, I had finally remembered who I was before they taught me to be quiet. Winter came early that year. The first snow blanketed Boise in soft white, muffling the world into silence. From my window, the city looked peaceful, as if nothing in it had ever been broken. I wrapped my hands around a mug of tea and watched the flakes drift down, each one landing and disappearing into something larger. That quiet, impermanent beauty mirrored how I felt, changed but not hardened. In the weeks since Thanksgiving, the silence from my family had been loud. My mother's last message, short and cold, said only, "We expected better from you." My father hadn't called at all. Laya had sent a text the night after our call, "I'm thinking about what you said." That was it. Yet somehow the absence of noise didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a beginning. Thomas's footsteps approached from behind. He set a folder on the table beside my tea. "The lawyer sent the paperwork," he said, "for the scholarship." I smiled, running my fingers over the embossed letters, "The Eleanor Foundation for Women in Transition." Inside were drafts, budgets, potential names of community partners. It was small, quiet work, but it mattered. "This feels right," I murmured. Thomas nodded. "It's more than right. It's yours." I spent my days filling out forms, writing letters, setting up meetings. Every decision carried a kind of freedom I hadn't known before. There was no approval to earn, no family to appease, just the clarity of purpose. When I spoke to the women, the foundation aimed to help single mothers returning to school, widows restarting their careers, women rebuilding after financial hardship. I saw reflections of myself in all of them. Each story reminded me that survival was not shameful. It was sacred. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected call. It was Laya. Her voice was hesitant, softer than I remembered. "Mom, can I come by?" she asked. I paused, feeling my pulse quicken. Then I said, "Yes, come." When she arrived that afternoon, she looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way pride had been stripped back. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. She stood in the doorway for a moment, uncertain, before stepping inside. The apartment smelled of fresh bread. I had baked earlier, a habit I'd fallen back into during the quiet mornings. "You look well," she said, awkwardly glancing around. "I am," I replied gently. "Sit down." We sat across from each other at the table. The silence stretched, not tense this time, just searching. Finally she spoke. "I didn't come to argue," she began. "I came to say I'm sorry." Her eyes glistened as she continued. "I thought you'd always be there to fix things. You always were. I didn't realize what that cost you." Her words were tentative, fragile, but sincere. I listened, letting her speak, letting the truth come out unevenly the way it does when people are trying to heal. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added. I want to learn to stand on my own." I reached across the table, resting my hand over hers. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't pull away. "You don't need my forgiveness," I said softly. "You need your own, the kind that lets you start again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I was too," I admitted. "Every time I started over, I was terrified. But fear isn't failure, it's proof that you're trying." We sat there a while longer talking, not about debts or expectations, but about small, ordinary things: her work, my garden, the new snow. There were no dramatic reconciliations, no perfect closure. Just understanding, fragile and new, like the winter light filtering through the window. After she left, I stood by the door for a long moment, watching her car pull away. A faint warmth spread through my chest, not pride, not relief, but something quieter. Acceptance. Love that didn't demand, didn't bend, didn't hurt. Just love reshaped into something healthy. That night, Thomas and I took a walk through the park. The trees glistened under the streetlights, and our breath came out in soft white clouds. "How did it feel?" he asked. "Like breathing again," I said simply. "Like the air finally belongs to me." He smiled, slipping his arm around my shoulders. "You've built something strong, Eleanor. Stronger than what they tried to take from you." As we walked, I thought of all the years I'd spent measuring myself by the love I earned instead of the love I gave freely. I had mistaken endurance for strength, silence for grace. But true strength was quieter. It came from choosing peace over guilt, truth over appearances, self-worth over approval. The snow crunched beneath our feet as the city lights shimmered faintly in the distance. I tilted my head toward the sky, watching snowflakes drift like tiny confessions. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine entirely, finally, joyfully mine. If you've ever been told that love means giving until there's nothing left of you, remember this: real love respects boundaries, and true peace begins the moment you stop apologizing for protecting them. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, when did you learn to stop being quiet and start choosing yourself?